What's up, guys? I wanted to make this video give you my thoughts on solitary confinement, specifically extended use of it in jails and prisons. So I have experience with that both as a juvenile and as adult. Fortunately, in the last decade or so, people have come to the obvious conclusion that for juveniles specifically, this is not something that should be used. People are now also evolving to a point of understanding that for the same reasons, this is not something that should readily be used for adults either. My thoughts on it are that understanding the reason and rationale for putting people in solitary confinement as punishment and keeping all that in mind, having experienced it, I can tell you that it really, really fucks people up in the long run. It really does. It causes damage that I believe is irreversible. I mean, just think about what we're discussing here. You could take any animal with any sense of intelligence. Take monkeys as an example. Take them out of an environment where they're already social and happy and free and, active in their little community and put them in solitary confinement. Put them in there for a week, a couple of them, and then reintegrate them and see what happens. They'll never be able to live again the way they were. They'll be permanently damaged. They'll be hurting themselves. They'll lash out and they get violent. And imagine how much more so for us, the most intelligent of beings. It fucks people up. I'm telling you. And as a juvenile, what happened to me was it damaged my mind to the point that even upon release, I got released to the streets straight from solitary confinement conditions. And I recreated the same exact kind of setting for myself in the free world. I would just stay home. I would stay in my room and just lock myself in there and never go out and do my push-ups and workouts exactly like I did in solitary confinement. And so as crazy as it sounds, I became accustomed to that. And that is where the difficulty begins as far as overcoming the damage that occurred during those times. I had very, very difficult times in reintegrating and being around people. I wasn't comfortable. I felt very, very vulnerable and paranoid because of what I just experienced. I went through it as an adult as well. And, as an adult, I can tell you that my experience in solitary confinement was basically like one of being in an insane asylum. That's what I think of, especially like remembering the first times I walked into these places and just hearing it, screaming and fucking banging and crazy sounds and desperation and fucking crying and begging and all kinds of crazy shit happening. And that's just the beginning of it. That's just your first taste of what's about to come. Because the real punishment and the real damage, long-term damage, comes as time passes, gradually. People could withstand a certain amount of exposure to, things like that. But the longer you stay in those conditions, the more your mind drifts and becomes damaged. And I'm telling you, firsthand experience here, that the people that went through that shit with me as a child and the people that went through that shit with me as an adult are all fucked up as a result. Whether they admit it or not. I readily admit when things fuck me up. And a lot of people can't. But regardless, I'm telling you that they are fucking damaged. And for the most part, every single one of us that endured that kind of thing for a long period of time is also violent. We also are very prone to violent explosions and reactions. We overreact to things and we're quick to shed blood. And this is a byproduct of the mental anguish and despair and suffering and torment that you go through in being isolated for a long time. We're not meant to be in that kind of environment. So the typical daily experience in a place like that is that first there's a different sense of time. Time as we know it and experience it in the free world, is completely different than that when you remove all forms of stimulation. Basically, what I'm trying to say is every day in solitary confinement for me felt like multiple days in the free world. Time just dragged and dragged. The time it took from breakfast until lunch, the serving of meals is a way I use to differentiate time and days. it felt like forever sometimes. It was fucking amazing how I was in like a time warp where everything slowed down. 1 week felt like a month. 1 month felt like 4 or 5 months. 3 months felt like a year. And you just lose yourself in there. And the further you go into that, as far as time spent, the more you begin to touch insanity and start losing your mind. And I've observed it in so many people. Some people react in ways that, they just hurt themselves. They cut themselves. They try to commit suicide. I've seen unbelievable ways of people expressing themselves of frustration where they just brutalize themselves. They bang their heads on the wall until they fucking knock themselves out. People have razor blades and they cut themselves in ways that you'll never believe, and they do it just to get attention, just to get a break from the monotony. People get to the point of desperation where entertainment becomes, fucking with the guards and forcing them to extract you from a cell physically and beat the shit out of you. That becomes a form of entertainment just because it's something to break up the time and change the day-to-day fucking nightmare of solitary confinement. So you become crazy. Other people, I've seen other people just repeat the same things over and over and over and over again and slowly lose their minds in that way. Other people scream constantly because they can't stand the silence. The silence for them is the torment. Other people bang on their doors constantly, kicking their fucking cell doors, and it's just a non-stop barrage of crazy fucking desperate sounds. And it gets worse at night. People are crying and people have killed themselves, and I have to listen to this. I have to hear them slowly evolve to the point of such sorrow and desperation and hopelessness that they die and they kill themselves, and they're a couple cells away from me. I'm hearing this shit day after day, week after week, build up, and nobody gives a fuck. Nobody cares. So it's a very, very, difficult subject, because I know for the most part people who haven't experienced it in that way think, fuck these guys. How else are we going to deal with them? These guys are incorrigible. They can't behave themselves. They're a threat to others. They're a threat to the staff. My bottom line is, I agree with you in that. Put them in solitary confinement and fucking brutalize them mentally and emotionally like that if you want. If you're never going to fucking release them. But that's not the case. The majority, myself included, and up to 95% of those, 2 million plus in this country, probably 100,000 of which or so are in solitary confinement conditions, 95% will get released. And most of them get released immediately from there without any transitional step to help them, readjust. So what I'm saying to you is, regardless of how you feel about its implementation and use and, the need for it, the consequence of it is going to come to you. It's going to come to me. It's going to come to my children, to our society. When these people get released and they're fucked up in the head like I was, like I still am today as a result of solitary confinement 10 years ago and even fucking 20 years ago, even more so. And I consider myself to be way stronger, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, than the average person. And I'm here readily admitting to you how bad it fucked me up. And how it's a continual struggle, even after so many years. The shit never left me. I still struggle with it. So if I struggle with it to that degree, and I'm one of the few that was able to overcome and form somewhat of a normal life after shit like that, imagine the average person. Average person gets fucking destroyed by this. Then he has to come out and deal with the fact also that he's permanently blacklisted from legal employment, government opportunity in the form of benefits, housing, insurance, everything. You're fucked. So not only did we fuck up your mind and make you crazy and turn you into a fucking monster, an animal, but now we're going to take you from that cage and release you and just tell you good luck. Behave yourself. What the fuck is that? What the fuck do people think a person like that is going to do? I know what they're going to do. They're going to fucking explode. It's only a matter of time. So again, guys, I know there's going to be differences of opinion in this. I hope that my opinion can at least shed for you some light on a different perspective from someone who's gone through it, and especially for kids. It's fucking ridiculous to ever take a child and put them in solitary confinement. The worst fucking thing one could ever do. If you want to destroy somebody, someone's mindset, mentality, their spirit, everything about them, do that to them as a child. So I hope you guys can give this some thought and maybe benefit something from this. Thanks.